Welcome everyone to this Froebel Trust webinar. We're delighted tonight to be welcoming two very experienced teachers, Dr. Lucy Parker and Helen Ackerman. Lucy is Deputy Head Teacher and Helen is Head Teacher of Ludwig Nursery School, which is in Welwyn Garden City in Hertfordshire. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the geography of England, it is a county which is north of London. Lucy and Helen are going to be talking tonight about some work which really is a passion for them, cooking with young children. Lucy is one of the co-authors with Anna Denton of our latest pamphlet in the Froebelian Approach pamphlet series. They also were the recipients of a practice development grant from the Froebel Trust, which enabled them to look even more closely at their practice of cooking with children and families and their local community, with the base at their nursery school. So they are experts really in sharing their experiences of cooking with young children, a Froebelian occupation, and they do so from a Froebelian perspective. It's lovely to see so many of you joining us. I can see the chat whizzing up there and lots of people from all over the UK and indeed other countries joining us. Welcome to all of you. What's going to happen tonight is that following my introduction, Helen will kick us off with the start of the presentation that she and Lucy are going to give about their work on cooking with young children. And they'll speak for about half an hour or so. They'll introduce some of their work in the nursery, but they'll also show us some highlights from the latest pamphlet. If you'd like to download the pamphlet and haven't already done so, you can do that from the Froebel Trust website. It's free to download. And on Helen and Lucy's project page, you'll also find a lovely film about their work, and they're going to share a little extract from that film tonight. So there are lots of resources for you to access on the Trust website. After they've spoken for about 30 minutes or so, there will be a chance for your questions. So please don't be shy. If you've got any questions from their presentation or about cooking in general with young children, or about a Froebelian approach specifically, you will see at the bottom of your screen, if you're on a laptop or a PC, a little icon called Q&A. If you click that Q&A, you can type a question in there, and then I'll be happy to share that with Lucy and Helen after their presentation. You're welcome also throughout the webinar to chat on the chat bar, but please don't put your questions in there because it goes so fast that we're likely to miss them. So please do use the Q&A for your questions. My name's Sasha Powell and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Froebel Trust, and it's my great pleasure to welcome Helen and Lucy tonight. And I'm going to hand over to Helen now, and I believe she's going to share her screen and we'll start the presentation. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you, Sasha. That was such a lovely introduction. And I have to say what a huge privilege it is to be hosting this webinar tonight and sharing our fantastic project with you all. So just before we start, I thought it might be helpful to give you a little bit of context, as I know we've got an international audience here tonight. Next slide, please, Lucy. Not sure we're on the right slide. So Ludwig Nursery School is based in England, in Hertfordshire, and as Sasha has already just said, we're just a little bit north of London. And we're a large maintained nursery school, and currently we have 180 2 to 5-year-olds on roll. Maintained nursery schools in England have a long and very distinguished history, and are seen often as centres of excellence for early years. We've been cooking in the nursery for over 10 years, and during this time we've developed a dedicated cooking area and embedded cookery into our curriculum. We further developed our cooking through completing a Froebel Trust funded project last year developing community connections through cookery. And also, we're really proud that all of our staff have completed the first part of Froebel training through element 1 of the Froebel short courses. Through our cookery project, we wanted to reconnect and strengthen our community ties post-pandemic. We shared, during the lockdowns, we shared recipe cards and ingredients with our families so that they could cook at home. And this had such a positive response, allowing us all to feel so connected, which was so important at that time when we were all so isolated and vulnerable. However, post-pandemic, the need to be together and share food and strengthen our community seemed even more vital. So our cookery project started and resulted in the Let's Cook film, which was published by the Trust, as well as enabling us to develop our cookery practice. Froebelian principles have really guided us. And in relation to the new pamphlet, we've been looking at these in relation to our cooking. And for us, I think just looking at these different principles here, relationships are so very vital to us, and they underpin the whole of our curriculum. I just wanted to draw your attention to a couple of these, and I don't know, Lucy, whether you want to speak to any of these aspects too, and why they're particularly pertinent to us. So for us, the relationships is particularly important. And I think for me, knowledgeable and nurturing educators. And Lucy and I were chatting about this because I don't think that all of our practitioners have always thought, oh, wow, great, I love cooking with children. It's been quite a challenge for some of them. And somebody said the other day, goodness me, cooking was so scary when I came here, and I couldn't believe that I had to do it as part of the curriculum. And that particular person embraces it now and is somebody who we would say is a real ambassador. Lucy, do you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, Helen. Yeah, I think it's I think just picking up on your point about supporting practitioners, I think what we've really benefited from is working together. So for practitioners who are maybe a little bit more anxious about cooking, working alongside each other, and that peer-to-peer support has been really, really beneficial, and learning from each other and celebrating. I think cooking with young children is sometimes a bit of a messy process and a bit chaotic, and that's okay. And I think if you're a baker at home and you like to produce things that are sort of very beautifully presented, it might feel different when you cook with children. So I think that learning together as professionals has been really, really important.
Thank you, Lucy. Froebelian principles really guide us in our cookery and thinking about the importance of children's autonomy. For example, being able to get their own bowl from the shelf, measuring out their own ingredients is also important. Choosing their own apron and helping a friend to tie an apron is so important for children to be able to be independent in their learning. And it's also important that children are guided and supported by adults and developing positive relationships as they cook. And I just love this picture here. Have a look at the one in the middle. This is Faye. She's one of our students. We also have student teachers that train with us at the school. And you can just see the joy on her face as she's connecting with that child and helping her. You can see she's holding her fingers out and obviously helping her to count the spoonfuls into the bowl. It's absolutely magical. Don't get me started. So there's also risk and challenge involved with cookery, and Lucy will love to talk to everybody about the excitement and the skill of our children learning to crack an egg. And if you go to any of her training, you'll hear her talking about how important it is for children to learn how to do that. When I first took on my headship, Ludwig Nursery School was a mentor school for me, and I can remember going to Ludwig and watching a practitioner cook and seeing them using the sharp knives with children and thinking, goodness me, that's a sharp knife to use with a child. But again, that's that risk and challenge. Everything is carefully risk assessed, and children are competently taught how to use tools safely and effectively so that they can get really good results. Our cooking journey recently has allowed us to make more community connections through cooking. and has allowed us to consider how we're supporting all of our children. We're really proud to be a highly inclusive school. Anybody who comes to our door is welcome. And so what we want to do is make sure that every child who comes through the door can access cookery. And we've been left with a much clearer idea of how we want to develop our cookery next through the project. So we'll share some of those themes with you as we move on.
Thank you, Helen. So we want to talk to you a little bit about community links, and this has been a really, really important part of our project. So through our project, we really wanted to consider how cookery and food celebrated the different communities in our school. And I think this quote really sums up that strength of community connection. So how food preparation crosses all cultures, and that potential for uniting families and friends in that shared learning at that really, really deep level. Cooking and sharing food together is universal, and it's such a brilliant shared experience. And it really does strengthen our relationships to one another and enables us to share those similarities and differences. We really wanted to think more about how to involve our parents and carers in cooking, and how the food that we're cooking and eating represented our community. We often connect our cooking to books. And the book that you can see on the screen, All Are Welcome, really, really inspired us to think about how we could celebrate our community, and particularly this page, Time for Lunch, What a Spread, a dozen different kinds of bread, pass it round until we're all fed. So we wanted to think about that celebration of community through bread. Bread is an important food across the world and has been eaten for thousands and thousands of years. And all these lovely breads that you can see on the screen really, really reflect this quote so well, that unity in diversity. And these are some of the breads that the families donated to us that they cooked at home, which the children were able to taste and share together. So as part of our focus on developing community links, we've been inviting parents in to come and help us with cooking. And here is one of our mums helping us make chapatis. And here's her reflection on her experience. She really noticed how skilled the children were at cooking and how interested they were in the process of making chapatis. And this is a really lovely example of learning from one another in that meaningful context. Froebel really emphasised that importance of homeschool connections and those close relationships between parents and carers and educators. So as well as inviting the parents in to cook or share home recipes and food, we've also been planning home cooking, home learning experiences connected to cookery. So we shared some of our favourite stories that you can see on the screen. And we made videos of the staff reading the stories that we then shared with families so they could watch them at home. We also shared a recipe connected to each book that the children could try at home and cook with their families. And the families really enjoyed sharing their photos and cooking experiences with us. So really thinking about helping children to make interconnecting links with their learning is really important, and doing that within school is crucial, but also making those interconnecting experiences between home and school is really valuable. Bringing in parents and carers has been a really positive experience for us, and particularly post-pandemic. Having parents back in the nursery has just been really lovely after they had to be at such a distance for such a long time. And you can see from the reflections in these quotes, and we're so thrilled to hear that our parents are proud of their children's experiences and really seeing the value in cookery and realising that it's such a meaningful experience for all children. So in this slide, there's also a really nice example to share with you of how one of our practitioners has supported that homeschool link to make those community connections, and again through making bread. Again, providing that really meaningful experience for the children and the opportunity to develop positive connections with each other And I think what was really lovely about this experience was the pride of the child who brought in the bread from home to share with Donna, his key worker, and then that she was able to repeat that recipe and he was able to share that experience with his friends and then share that food together was really, really powerful. So now we just want to share a little bit with you about how we've cooked for all children and really our approach to inclusive cookery. And I think this quote here is really, really important. So that Froebelian approach, which values the uniqueness of every child rather than focusing on what the child cannot do, the starting point is always what the child can do. And some children might not be ready to engage with the whole cooking process and might just need to explore and taste the ingredients first. All efforts from the child should be valued, and cooking sessions can be adapted or changed depending on how best to support the needs of the children. This has been a really, really important part of our process in really considering how we can ensure all children are engaging with cookery. And on this next slide, I just want to share with you, this is a short clip, and this is from our cookery film, which the Froebel Trust produced. And this is just introducing some of the ways that we are supporting all children to cook.
Lots of the children in yellow group have quite high sensory needs and they want to explore the ingredients, so they eat a lot of the ingredients. So if we've got whatever we're cooking first, then they can have a taste of it first, which is really good. And then they can see what the end result is. So quite often it might be that I've already made the dough and then the main focus is the rolling and the cutting. But as we've gone along the year, they're starting to understand the process more and more, and they want to explore the ingredients for themselves. So they're noticing now I follow a recipe and they're noticing what's on the recipe and relating that to the real ingredients and getting those themselves, using those themselves. So the process, we kind of start at the end, but we've back-chained all the way to the beginning, and now they can mostly all do it all from the start, which is really good.
So as we thought more about how we were going to cook and ensure all children were able to cook and access cooking in their own way, we were really inspired by Alison Clark's work on slow pedagogy. After watching the Froebel Trust webinar on slow pedagogy, the comments really resonated with our Froebelian approach, and these quotes that Alison Clark shared that you can see on the screen seem really poignant. Absorbing new knowledge at their own speed seem particularly relevant to our children with additional needs, and the benefits of uninterrupted time warranted further thinking and consideration. So during our cookery project, we thought about how to ensure children had longer periods to cook, with staff available in the cooking area to support and guide. We also really observed the children carefully, and this aspect of slow pedagogy, of being with the child, seemed particularly pertinent to working with children with additional needs, and has summed up how we've supported some of our children to cook. Closely observing the child is really important, and the idea that slow pedagogy isn't necessarily always slow, but it can be intense and fast-paced. But seeing that learning is co-created and collaborative has really reflected how our children are learning in the cookery area. This learning story shared on the screen really captures this approach, and you can see the importance of starting with the child in this example. The unhurried approach is really key here. Giving this child time and space has allowed him to flourish. And I'll just give you a moment to just quickly read it. So in summary, in order to support inclusive cookery and to enable the children to gain confidence, we've really worked on repetition, so allowing children to repeat favourite recipes and revisit the cooking area at their own pace. Really developing those trusting relationships has been really key, and giving children time and space to explore and flourish. So I'm just going to hand back over to Helen now.
Thank you, Lucy. So we're just coming towards the end of the final part of our presentation, and we thought it might be helpful to share some of our next steps. We've really learned that it's very, very important that it's a slow cook process. And to coin the phrase from the Froebel tutors, it's slow cook, not microwave. We're just taking little steps along the way. And if you remember what I said right back at the very, very beginning, this has been a 10-year journey for us. And it's been a 10-year journey for us as we've embedded this into our curriculum. And also it's the same for the way that we're working with our children. And I think what Lucy's just talked about with the slow pedagogy and the unhurried child, it's seeing those moments of magic in every moment and not rushing things along. And that's when we can see some really deep and meaningful learning for our children. As you hopefully will be so inspired that you'll start to develop cookery a little bit more in your setting, it's really important that you listen to the child and adapt your cookery curriculum to meet the child's needs. And I think the things that Lucy was talking about just now, particularly around the child's learning journey that we just looked at, is an illustration of how every child can be included. At our school, we follow seasonal rhythms, and we use seasonal rhythms to also influence the recipes that we're doing with our children. So, for example, when we come back in the autumn term in England, that's a time of harvest time, when we have apples on the trees, and we're harvesting potatoes and various different crops. So I can remember seeing some children who had found some apples and were grating them up and making a wonderful apple crumble earlier this term. And I think that's really important to consider that in a Froebelian approach. I also remember last summer when a child in Lucy's group had wanted to cook with strawberries, and we were thinking, well, we want to cook, we don't just want to make a fruit salad. And Lucy took the children down to the shops with their little shopping lists and their high-vis jackets, and off they went to buy some strawberries. And they came back, and you can see on the screen here that they actually adapted one of our recipes by adding strawberries. I wasn't too sure, Lucy, I wasn't too convinced that that was going to work, but actually they were absolutely delicious. As you can see from the quotes on the screen, they were yummy. And we squashed the strawberries and the biscuits went pink. And I think that's such a strong illustration of how cookery crosses all areas of learning. So what are we going to do next? Well, we're building on a project that one of our teachers started last year as part of her NPQ EYL qualification. And she took on as her implementation project growing plants with the children, and growing plants that we would be able to eat and use in our cookery area. And she's continued that work this year, creating an indoor greenhouse, which has been brilliantly made by our site manager, Martin. And you can see here all the different plants that the children have been growing. And I think they're almost ready to go out into the raised beds now, which is really exciting. So we're going to do a little bit more of that. Anything else, Lucy, that we're going to do a little bit more of?
I think the focus around growing, but also developing our compost area, I think is also key.
Thank you, Lucy. So this is our final quote, and I'm going to read it out to you because I think it's really important to us. A Froebelian approach is respectful of the child, promotes warm and trusting relationships, and cooking is a really powerful way to enable this. And we really want you to take that message away from this presentation. I hope you've been able to see from the illustrations that we've provided, and this is a wonderful illustration of one of our practitioners and one of our children. The engagement between the two and the levels of trust you can just see it all in that picture. So I do hope that what we've shared with you tonight has been useful. Lucy, are we going to go on now and have a little look at the pamphlet?
Yeah, thank you, Helen. So I'll just stop sharing this and then just move on to sharing the pamphlet, and we'll just go through that and just highlighting some of the other points that we've shared in that. So if you just bear with me for 1 minute. So hopefully some of you have had a chance to look at the pamphlet, but if you haven't already, we'll just share a little bit here. So this is a second edition. So myself and Anna wrote the first edition, I think, in 2017, I think, so quite a while ago. So it's been a really lovely experience to do a second edition, and really just, I think particularly the work we've done around our cookery project has really helped to add more information and more examples to the pamphlet. So this is an interactive document, so you can jump into different sections and also obviously go from the start. So as we shared at the start, just really thinking about those Froebelian principles are really important. And I think they've, you know, underpinned everything we've done and really, really guided us. I think considering preparing how to cook is really important, and every setting is so unique. And I think I would really say, if you haven't started cooking yet, slow steps. And I think it's often easy to come to a setting like ours and see a beautiful cookery area that's all laid out. And if you haven't got that space or haven't got that opportunity yet, that's fine. I think there are different ways to cook. And so I think working with your setting is really, really important. And just starting small, maybe starting with a simple recipe and just a few utensils is really key. We talked about risk and challenge in the presentation, and I think that is so important. But I think it's really important to work together with this. And I think sometimes practitioners can feel a little bit nervous about giving young children sharp knives. So really sharing those concerns and working towards how to enable that practice together, I think is really, really key. Connecting with nature is absolutely crucial, and obviously that is such an important part of Froebel's philosophy and thinking. And this is something that, as Helen said, we've really tried to start developing in our setting. And I know there's some settings who are much further on with their lovely allotments and they're growing. So that's what we're really, really aspiring to next. But I think really thinking about that whole process of the planting, the growing, the harvesting, the eating, the composting. So really seeing that kind of interconnecting whole is really, really important and really valuable for the children. And really thinking a way of different ways you can share produce with the children. So you might not have necessary things to harvest depending on what kind of setting you're in, but maybe bringing in something from home. Or so for example, in this photo, a practitioner brought in rhubarb that she'd grown in her own garden to share with the children. We've obviously talked lots and lots about community links, and I think that is really, really key. And I think one of the most powerful parts of cooking. So hopefully there's lots of ideas in here to give you to think about that. And we've also obviously talked about the unique child, which is so important, and that aspect of cookery for inclusion. So contained in our new pamphlet is another learning story about Sam, who became one of our most passionate and wonderful cooks last year, and was just a real really amazing to watch how he developed his confidence in cookery over the year. Thinking about that really nurturing experience of cooking is really important, as we've talked about those close, warm relationships that develop between child and adult. And also really thinking about that interlinking element of cookery. And we've thought a lot about how cookery influences play in our curriculum. So as we mentioned in our presentation, really thinking about how stories are a really powerful way to inspire cookery and connect to cookery. And I think also thinking about how cooking then can connect to other first-hand experiences. So for example, cooking over a bonfire, going to the shops to buy ingredients, obviously gardening and harvesting, and then how those experiences might feed into children's play, and particularly their symbolic play. And that connection, again, of stories and rhymes. And then at the end of the pamphlet, we've just got some final thoughts and some top tips for you to share. So I'll stop sharing my screen now, and I think we're going to move to some questions, and Sasha's going to return. Thank you, Sasha.
Thanks very much, Lucy. Thank you, Helen, too. I wish I could say I was a good cook. I'm a terrible cook, but I enjoy the process. So I wanted to ask you a question about the balance of process and product. Clearly, both are important in a Froebelian approach. Process is perhaps sometimes seen to be more important. But for children, I imagine when they're cooking, the end product is probably quite important too. So what happens if it all goes horribly wrong and you end up with a flat cake or or strawberry biscuits that aren't pink? What do you do to support the children in circumstances where maybe they're disappointed with what the product is?
That's a good question. I don't think we've ever had a completely disappointing experience. I know I nearly burnt a school down once when I first started teaching, which wouldn't have been good. I think if it doesn't work out, seeing that as a learning experience, we'll try again, is probably a good way to approach that. And I think ultimately the process is probably the most important part. And I don't think children also mind when their cakes might not look absolutely shiny and amazing. But I do think having something to eat at the end is a real hook, and it's really motivating for the children. And I think that's often why you see children stay in the cooking area and really persistent right to the end. So often children who might not want to stay at an activity for that long. But yeah, I think it is. Yeah, I guess it's a balance between the two. I don't know whether I've answered that very well. Helen, have you got anything to add?
I was just thinking of that story by Mick Inkpen when he makes a birthday cake and it's a flat thing. And yeah. I have heard practitioners say, oh, it's a flat cake. And it's part of the process, isn't it? But it's and I don't think it matters. Sometimes they take home rock hard bread rolls and you think, gosh, that would sink a ship.
Yeah.
But the pride that they have because of what they've made is so important. So have we answered your question, Sasha?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a question from Jane Reed. So thank you for your question, Jane. And we should acknowledge Jane's role in the pamphlet as well. As Jane was the editor of your pamphlet, but also of the whole pamphlet series. So thank you for being involved, Jane, and bringing this latest pamphlet to fruition. We've had a couple of questions that are really about restrictions. In one case, one of the participants has said that in her nursery they're not allowed to bring eggs in, and it's not because of any of the children having an allergy to eggs, but that the leader of the nursery doesn't want them to bring eggs in. And in another example, the participant has asked how to deal with a situation where the nursery is only allowed to use the local authority prescribed recipes and they can't use their own recipes. Have you ever come across anything like this? And what kind of advice would you give for dealing with those kinds of limitations? You know, are there ways of getting around them or not? You know, in your experience, what would you do?
That's a tricky one. I have to say I've never heard. I'd be interested to know which local authority, whether that's England based or somewhere else. I've never heard of recipes being prescribed by the authority. I'm not. That's really tricky. I would hope there'd be a nice variety of recipes to use, and that maybe you could adapt those. I think the way we use our recipes, we've created sort of simple recipe cards where we measure with spoonfuls and cups. So perhaps there's a way of adapting what the local authority are offering and to make it relevant to the children. In terms of eggs, I've also not come across that, but I would say there's so many different things you can cook without eggs, and so maybe it's about really thinking about those different recipe opportunities. I was just trying to think some of the things we make: biscuits, lots of different types of bread. Pizza's a really lovely one to make from scratch, so making the dough. Helen, can you think of?
Oh, you've put me on the spot. I was going to say bread and pizza. And I think if you've got those restrictions, the thing you need to do is find a solution, but to work with those restrictions, so the children can still have that opportunity to cook. Yes, there's a good example on the screen. Use an egg substitute if that's an alternative. You can.
Mm.
And maybe the idea of sort of harvesting your own food would really come in there. That sort of that power of making growing something that you can cook with, or maybe asking families for donations of food that are able to be used in the setting. So yeah.
That takes me on to another question, really, which is about a different kind of limitation, I suppose. And you did acknowledge what a beautiful space and how well resourced it is, but you did say also that, you know, you've been cooking for a long time and that's built up over time in a slow cook way. But not all settings will have the space or the resources or to be able to offer a cooking experience in the same way that you do at Ludwig. So, forgive the pun, but what would you say are the central ingredients? What's most important if you are limited in that way? What would you recommend?
I think ensuring children have their own utensils is really, really important. So if you're able to make sure every child has a bowl and a spoon, so it's a really active and engaging process. So investing in that, I think, is really key. I suppose if you haven't got the space, really thinking about how you can store things effectively, maybe it might be you need to just keep things in a box and then you bring them out and use it. If you haven't got a dedicated space, use a different area. And I think the way that we're cooking with cups and measuring with spoonfuls is really helpful, because you don't need lots of white scales or, you know, kind of fancy equipment to cook. And probably starting with simple recipes, so recipes that just need a few ingredients, I think would probably be helpful as well.
I was just thinking, Lucy, about our 2-year-old provision, because we don't have a dedicated cooking area for them. So they will come down and they will gather the bowls and the spoons and the things that Lucy's talked about. And obviously they're very young children, so we need to pare it back for them a bit. But they can still have that experience of having their own bowl, having their own spoon, and doing the measuring themselves. But they just do that from a tray. So you can work your way around it. The other thing I just wanted to say about our cooking bowls is we use Pyrex bowls, so they're clear, and that's really part of the child's learning experience, so they can actually see the changes occur as they add a wet ingredient to a dry ingredient. You know, if you have a bowl that's coloured and they can't see that happening, you're losing a learning opportunity there.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about sort of practical resources. One is that you showed the beautiful book, All Are Welcome. I wondered if you'd got other recommendations for books that you might want to share. And there was a question about what are the best knives to offer to the children as well. Do you have any recommendations in that respect too?
Oh, I get lots of my knives from the charity shop. So the good old-fashioned butter knives with the sort of, I don't know, like an enamel, no, not, you know, they're like yellow edge to them. The old buttering knives that grannies used to have. are absolutely brilliant, and they are still quite sharp and will cut a vegetable really nicely. So always look out for those. We don't use serrated knives because they are dangerous if they were to cut a child. And we also buy knives from just from a normal knife shop with a green plastic handle. They need to be kept nice and sharp. So if a child is accidentally cut, we've never had that, but it could happen, and we do have risk assessments in place for those. Mm-hmm. And you asked about books, and Lucy, we've got quite a few books that we use for cooking, haven't we?
Yeah, I think when we during our project, it was something we really focused on. So trying to build up that really lovely bank of books that connect to cooking and growing as well. So I think, I mean, in England, we've got lots of traditional tales that link really nicely to cookery. Obviously, the gingerbread man and the enormous turnip, and a little red hen. We've also used, I think we shared on the screen, a book called Chapati Moon, which is really nice.
Did you say Honey Biscuits?
Honey Biscuits, yeah, that's a really nice story as well, about a little boy who makes biscuits with his grandma, and then she talks about the ingredient. They talk about the ingredients and where the ingredients comes from during the story. So it makes those really nice links of understanding where different things come from. Pumpkin soup is a really lovely story, particularly for autumn. There's a book called Errol's Garden about a little boy who sets up a community garden, so making those really nice links with growing vegetables. I'm trying to think of any others. Can you think of any others, Helen?
I was just thinking of the ones by Child Play that we've got for our younger children, which are really good. And there's one on cooking, isn't there?
Yeah, there's simple books
and growing, which are really lovely.
Cook It and Grow It. One about recycling as well, so sort of like linking to those different processes of cooking. But yeah, I think sort of Googling, like I look on websites a lot and think you know, just sort of it's quite nice just sort of researching books, and I think making those links between cooking and books is really, really powerful. To support that interlinking learning. So I think if it's something you're interested in, I'd really, really recommend it.
Thank you. Can I ask you about the recipe cards a little bit, because those are homemade, aren't they? And there are two aspects to this question. One part of the question really is, where do you get the symbols from that you use? Is there, you know, do you recommend any in particular? And why do you make cards and not books? Or do you make books as well, perhaps?
That's a good question. So when I first started cooking, when I first started teaching 20 years ago, I always use books, or the nursery that I started working in, we use books, and I think there's different ways of doing it, and that was a really lovely way, using photographs of the children actually cooking to support the book sequence. We started developing recipe sequence cards at Ludwig, and it's sort of like taken off. We literally just find images from searching online, and doing a bit of cutting and pasting. It's sort of been a bit trial and error over the years, so it doesn't sound very technical. And we've sort of practiced recipes. So myself and Anna have practiced recipes, you know, worked out how you might measure with cups and spoonfuls. But I think thinking of ways that work for your children is really important. Also, getting children to make their own recipe cards and books is really lovely, and particularly something that works really nicely with maybe older children. So that meaningful mark making, that meaningful literacy is really powerful. And I know I think at Cowgate they make really lovely cookery books as well that I think you can still buy. I've got some of those. So yeah, I think there's lots of ways to think about representing the recipes to the children. But I think just to add, maybe that might be useful for children who maybe aren't ready to follow that recipe yet. So we've really developed the use of using visuals with our children, and we Makaton sign as well as good practice. So Anna, with the work she's done with her group, sort of supporting children with the use of visuals so they can articulate what they want, and in using Makaton sign has been really important. So I think it's thinking about your children and how best to support that level of communication and develop with them. So maybe a combination of lots of different ways.
Thank you. Do you ever make, or do the children ever make books after the cooking experience about the cooking experience rather than about the recipes, or perhaps incorporating a recipe of what they've made?
Yeah, so we do sometimes make like little learning storybooks that we might then put in the book corner for the children to access, so they can reflecting on their learning. And we put quite a lot of, we have lots of photographs around the setting, don't we, Helen, and capturing children's voice. So at the moment we've got a display in the cooking area, sort of capturing the bread that we've been making and eating recently. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. There are a couple of questions in your pamphlet, and indeed during the presentation and in the film. You do talk very thoughtfully and sensitively about how to introduce children with each child has unique needs to the experience of cooking, but some may need more support than others. And I don't know whether you can talk a little bit more about that process of introducing children who perhaps for different reasons may find it difficult to engage with adults or other children in the cooking process itself.
Yeah, I think really the starting point is really that close observation of the child is so important. So knowing your children really well, and watching them and being sort of attuned to how they are being. And I think, as we were talking about in the presentation, those sort of small steps. And so something we might do is, if a child doesn't want to come into the cooking space, maybe taking cookery ingredients to the child. I think Anna's process of showing the children the end product, that back chaining, has been really helpful, hasn't it, Helen? And I think that process of, you know, starting with the finished product and going backwards, that kind of the sort of whole and then the separate parts, which is obviously very Froebelian, I think has also helped. So that hook of, oh, I can have a little taste on the biscuit before I actually start that process, and not necessarily needing the children to do that whole process of cooking. So maybe just having the dough there ready for them to roll or explore. I think really responding to their sensory needs has been really important. So if the children need to taste and explore the ingredients, and I think it's really helped. I mean, we are very, very lucky. We have a very high level of staff ratio to children, and I think that has allowed us to give children more time in the cooking area, because we've been able to have an adult in there to sort of cook at their own pace. So I think that has been really, really helpful, and keeping that sort of area quite calm. Is there anything else, Helen?
No, I think I was pleased that you touched on sensory needs for children, and I think that early exploration can sometimes link to how we have our Play-Doh station set up, so the children are able to make their own Play-Doh, handle flour. So then there's that connection from doing that and moving to cookery. And I can remember observing a child last year who was just at that exploration stage, that sensory stage of, this is great flour and I'm just going to be in the moment with it. And then seeing her a few months down the line actually able to do something with that flour and tolerate some liquids going with it, and the feeling of all of those things. But I think it goes with that kind of slow pedagogy and unhurried child. Let's just be in the moment here, and valuing that, because then it can develop at its own pace.
Thank you. You've mentioned you've got a lot of flexibility due to relatively high adult-to-child ratios. Several people have asked about the availability and accessibility of cooking. You know, is it something that happens at set times, or with set numbers of children? How does it work? How do you make it work to ensure that all the children are included who want to be?
That's a good question. So we're a really big setting, so I suppose that's one of our challenges really. You know, we have 180 children on roll at the moment, so they're not all there at the same time. But so we do sort of need some sort of rotas and routines in place to ensure that equity of access. So we have rotas, so groups sign up, and we aim for every group to be able to cook every 2 weeks, which basically means somebody is cooking pretty much every day.
Yeah.
Because of the number of groups we've got. And then when staffing allows, keeping the cooking area open for children to then sort of access. So it's that combination of those planned adult activities and then the children having more freedom to come in and maybe make something of their own choosing. But again, I think, you know, some of that is around staffing constraints, and as I'm sure lots of people who are listening are practitioners, staffing is a real challenge. But what we found actually with our parents coming in to help has been really, really helpful, and they're really good at sort of clearing the kitchen and doing all the tidying up, because all that the background to cooking is quite complicated, and I think that's probably what can sometimes put people off. You know, it feels quite time consuming and messy, so I think having volunteers has been really, really helpful, and getting them involved in that as well.
When you said 160 children on roll, I had visions of a Guinness Book of Records enormous pink biscuit being made in the grounds. So one of the other questions that we've had is about children with allergies. You know, if you've got children in the setting who have got food allergies, how do you manage that?
That's a really good question, and I think allergies are so much more prevalent these days, aren't they? And you know, children's safety is an absolute priority. I think the key is working with your cohort. It's very bespoke. A couple of years ago, we had a child with really, really complex allergies. This year, we don't have as many children. So I think it really is obviously working around the needs of the children. So I think these days there's so many great substitutes. So particularly if you're thinking about being gluten-free, there's lots and lots of you know, gluten-free flour. We have some children who are vegan, so there's lots of great dairy alternatives. We have really clear signs up in our cookery area for children's medical needs, just to ensure that all practitioners know what children can and can't have. So I think it is about working to your cohort and the children's needs, and adapting things if necessary. That's really important. I think ensuring that children are included is really, really important. So, you know, if you've got a child who needs to be gluten-free in the group, well, then everybody can cook and use gluten-free flour to make it safe. I think was there anything you'd add, Helen?
I was just thinking about the child from a couple of years ago who has had the most amount of allergies of a child that I've ever worked with, and the fact that we did everything we could to ensure that she had equity to our curriculum and that she would be in that area, and actually praise to our practitioners for making sure that they were so diligent and careful around her. And it was wonderful that she was able to fully embrace and experience all of our curriculum, and that those allergies weren't a restriction to her.
Thank you. We've had a question which is, I suppose, only partially about cooking outdoors, but it's from someone who is in a setting that is fully outdoors. And the question really is about to what extent the children access and engage in cooking on their own, and to what extent there are adults alongside them or supporting them. So part of my question really is about that balance of children being able to be independent and autonomous in the cooking area. The second part of my question really is about, excuse me, I think maybe you've answered this already. What do you need? What comes before being able to balance freedom and guidance? You know, what do you need that underpins this idea of freedom with guidance in order to know the right amount of freedom to give and the right and kinds of guidance to provide?
It's a good question. I think some of it is around having a really organised cooking area. So I think we've worked really hard on ensuring that everything's really well laid out for the children so they can access lots of things with independence. So I think thinking about how your sort of physical space and how you're arranging things supports that independence and that autonomy for the children. I think it's a really careful balance, isn't it? I don't think we would ever probably, would you agree, Helen, we'd never have children completely on their own in the cooking area. But then I think that
always
is
be an adult alongside.
Yeah. And I think it's knowing when to sort of step in and move back. And I think because the children cook so regularly, so they have those experiences modelled to them so regularly, and then you sort of get to that point where the child becomes really competent and familiar with the recipe, and that repetition is really important. And then knowing that they can, and I think as they get older as well, you see that with our children who are older, to get to that point where, okay, here's your ingredients, here's your recipe, go, and they can do it themselves. Does that answer the question? Helen, do you want to add anything there?
I think because we have that structured activity, don't we, where the children go out in school, small groups, and where they are taught quite explicitly how to follow a recipe, because they practice and there's that repetition, that skill becomes embedded, and that helps them to become then independent and able to do those things for themselves.
Thank you. A bit of a sciencey question. When the children have made whatever they're making, and if it's something that needs to be baked, for example, or grilled, do the adults take that from the children and pop it in the oven, then bring it back when it's cooked, or do the children have the opportunity to see that process of change happening to what they've made?
So they can see that because we're really lucky. So our kitchen is right next door to the cooking area. So they'll often come into the kitchen and see the cakes going in the oven or the biscuits going in. So they're sort of seeing, like you say, seeing that process of change. And I guess that can be a challenge as well, if in certain settings that you might not be able to have a cooker in, and often sometimes the cookery area is in a different part of the school, or you might have to wheel a cooker in on a trolley. So I think again it's working with your setting. We cook quite a lot on fires as well, on bonfires, so children seeing that process over a real fire is really valuable and really exciting as well.
Yeah, and then there's the magic of blancmange and jelly, isn't there? That doesn't need
we've never done blancmange. I have to say I'm not a cook. So.
Well, we've literally got a few seconds left, so I need to say huge thanks to both of you, and thanks to everyone who's joined us tonight. And we've had some really great questions coming through. I'm sorry I haven't managed to get through all of them. There were so many, and they've all been brilliant, but hopefully we can pass some on to you anyway. And everyone can access your pamphlet from the website and your film and your project report, and also there'll be a recording of tonight's webinar on the website within a couple of weeks. So it just remains for me to thank you again and to wish everyone a very good evening. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.